All right, perfect. We're good to go. We are live.
Okay, Caleb.
So
You
just
want
want
to?
to thank everybody for joining us again.
Yeah.
Caleb and Andy Junkin here with YFNR, Washington Farm Bureau, always talking about succession planning, always talking about the Coming Home to Farm online course. But tonight, what are we talking about, Andy?
We're just going to talk about a book called Relentless by Tim Grover, and it's a book on sports psychology, and we're going to talk about applying it to farming. And Kobe. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Kobe Bryant, Tim Grover was a trainer for Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, a lot of the greats in basketball and other sports. And Kobe Bryant says Tim knows more about than anyone about the mental side of the sports. This book is a blueprint for discovering where you're capable of achieving, getting results you never imagined, and reaching for the highest levels of success, and even going higher. And I'm never sports guy myself. I mean, when everybody's watching football, I'm working. But the thing is that I think there's a lot of applications of sports psychology to farming, and I've spent a lot of time looking at that. And I think this is one of the best books to really that every farm family could really apply as a successor is coming home to the farm.
Good. That's good to hear. So getting into that book right away, what if, I don't know many farmers that sit down and read. Maybe there are. Is there an alternative to the book at all, first off?
Oh, there's an audiobook for sure. Right.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of farmers that are reading audiobooks as they're driving a tractor.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think there's a lot actually. So yeah, more and more. So it's actually a good book. I mean, it's a guy that's pretty full of himself. I don't know if I'd have a beer with him, but I think what he talks about is there's three types of competitors: the cooler, the closer, and the cleaner. And basically, it's the difference between being good, being great, and being unstoppable. And I think that we haven't really talked about the mindset of a farmer who's unstoppable. And I mean, we often, just because you're born into a successful family business doesn't mean that that's a farm family will be successful 20 years down the road.
Right.
We often talk about the third generation curse, where it takes one generation to start a farm, the second generation to grow it into an empire, and the third generation to piss it away. Mm-hmm. We don't ever think about what causes that farm to fail. And a lot of it comes down to psychology and the internal drive that the successor has in taking the farm and making it successful even to another level.
Right. Is that something that can be learned then? Does the book talk about that at all? Or is this just in human nature?
I think it's I think a lot of farmers, like there's a Dutch saying that the tigers can never change its stripes. And there's an attitude in agriculture that, either you're born with it or you don't. But I think that there's a time and point, there's time when a boy becomes a man or a girl becomes a woman, and that, realizing who you are and what you want out of life happens as you hit your early 20s. You start considering your career, what you're doing with your life. And there's a lot of farmers that are in their 40s and 50s that never came to that realization. They basically went through the motions of, my parents expected me to farm, and so I came home to the farm out of obligation, right? And they feel that they're basically trapped living somebody else's dream. Like I had a farmer, he was in his 50s, and he was actually talking about being a congressman, and basically complaining to me that when he was 14, his dad, he basically in his 50s didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up. Essentially, he was having a midlife crisis, and essentially he complained that his dad, when he was 14, had bought or his grandpa had bought a farm and said, well, that's where you're going to live. And that's actually turned out where he did live. And he felt he was living his grandpa's dream, not his own dreams. And in his 50s, he was still lost as to what he wanted to be in life. They had a successful business, but it had been much more successful, 15 years earlier, when dad and grandpa were running the farm. And basically, things were falling apart. And
Right.
it was all came down to that internal drive just wasn't there because he felt he was living somebody else's dream. And I think that a lot of farmers, they get stuck into that. I mean, a lot of farm debt cases that I've come across, that's the situation, is that, you know, when they decide to pull the plug, I've seen a guy that he broke down crying saying that, you know, I never really wanted to farm anyways. You know, and here he had inherited a very successful business, but it fell apart because he just didn't have that drive.
Right.
And I think it was just a matter of him not looking at himself in the mirror and asking himself, really, what do you want to do in your life? And I think that sometimes it's easy to fall into living somebody else's dream instead of your own. And that's the truth, whether it's in farming or any other scenario in life. I mean, there's very few people that actually become their own men or women, that they actually live their own dreams.
Yeah.
And it's really important to do that.
So going back to the book quick, while we're still in the beginning of this video, was Tim Grover, he's presenting on MJ, mostly I assume in this book. I haven't seen it myself. I've seen a little bit of an interview that they put together.
Sure.
And I've also seen part of The Last Dance, which is the Michael Jordan documentary that has since come out, since this book come out. But is he referencing, what was it about like MJ and Kobe that set them apart? Was it their preparation? Was it their work ethic while they're on the job? Was it their recovery? What is brought out in the book that puts them next level above?
Just demanding more of yourself than anyone else could ever demand of you. Being internally driven. I mean, it used to be in basketball. I mean, if you had the talent, you could be one of the best in your high school basketball team, right? You didn't have to put in the work. I mean, you could just, you know, if you had the talent, you could succeed.
Yeah, you show up.
And then basically, as long as you're better than average, you could go out for the tryouts for the college team, and you just had to be better than average to be on the bench, right? And the same thing with the NBA, you just had to be better than average on the team, and you'd make it into the NBA as if you had the talent. And I think that's the way it was always in farming too. You just had to be. I mean, a banker one time told me like I'm never worried about the guys that are in the top 50%. I'm only worried about the guys in the bottom 10%. And you just have to be better than average in order to succeed. And I think that this guy was in the 70s that was a banker. And I think that's the way it's always been in farming, is that as long as you're better than average, you can weather any storm. And it's the bottom 10% that always get cut, right? Whether there's a drought or economic crisis, doesn't matter. I mean, life will catch up to them. And I think where we get caught up in farming is that I think in the future, we might have, you look at Brazil, for instance. I mean, the Chinese are basically have burnt half the rainforest there, and they're developing that. They're going to be developing more land in Brazil and South America over the next 5 years. That's prime agricultural land. Then there is actually a better quality land than what's in the Midwest, and more of it than what's actually in the Midwest within 5 years or less. That Beltway project is huge. Mm-hmm. And, right now there's a shortage of commodities in the short term, but I fear that there's going to be an overabundance in a very short period of time. You look at GMO technology, we're just increasing production yields every year. You look at dairy production, for instance. I mean, every year we get better milk, making more milk, right?
Yes.
And the thing is that what we never realize is that I think that if you want to be farming, you just can't be shooting to be in the top 50% anymore. I think you got to be realizing that you've got to be in the top 10%. In order to be there, you have to be in the top 1%, shooting to be in that top 1%.
Right.
And whether or not you're ever going to have the talent or to be Michael Jordan, you've got to have that drive. If you really want to be able to pass over grandma's farm to your grandchildren, you've got to be driven to be the best. And that's why I'm saying this book by Tim Grover and the overall concepts that this basically douchebag has provided is valid for farming, because I mean, Michael Jordan actually got cut from his team in high school. And that created such an intense drive to be the best. Then he never slouched at all. He always was driven to be the best, to be at an extra level. And I think as a farmer, you have to never assume that you're going to succeed, that you're entitled. You know, if you want to pass over grandma's farm, you got to assume that it's lost. And that's up to you to work your butt off every day to take it from good to great, and to be a better farmer with the challenges that every day from good to great.
Right.
So that you're a better farmer and better family man as well.
Right. There's always, I mean, I come from a college sports background, and there's always a certain level of intensity that you need, one as an athlete, two as a competitor, to rise to the occasion. And I mean, in sports, it's easy. You either win or lose, sort of thing. In farming or career, it's definitely more of a long-term goal that you're going for. But I mean, I had coaches and teammates and everybody from pretty much from youth all the way until I decided I was done. You can't just flip on a switch. You can't show up to the soccer game, flip on a switch, and be able to be at your best performance. It's the preparation leading up to, it's the recovery afterwards to prepare you for the next day or the next competition, no matter how far out it is. It's you can't just expect to change everything on a dime. It's working on your craft and trying to get yourself to the next level or to a better level.
And I think that's what the difference is between the farmers that succeed in the long term and the farmers that fail. The farmers that fail, that they up their game the last 6 months before things are falling apart. The farmers that succeed, I mean, whether it's they're in the shop by 6 o'clock in the morning, whether it's February or May, you know, they're driven to be the best every day. They're not just you know, farming for 6 weeks in this, for cash croppers, for instance. I've seen guys farm 6 weeks in the spring, 6 weeks in the fall, right? And the rest of the time they kind of slouch off. It was the same thing for sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the guys that are every day in the shop by 6 o'clock in the morning, giving it all they've got, are the ones that succeed.
Right.
And I think I want to touch on, you know, we talk about the family farm, and I think it's the same thing for families as well, as that, you know, we have to assume when we're talking about 50% of family farms possibly failing in the future due to economic crisis, we also have to address the fact that 50% of families will fail because of divorce. And you look at what makes a successful marriage, it's the guys that don't take their marriage for granted 1 day of their 1 hour of their lives, right? It's they're always being consistent and being driven to be the best potential husband or spouse that they can possibly be. And I think that when we talk about the family farm, you've got to decide for yourself at a very young age, what is it you really want in life? Are you getting married because your parents think it's time? Or are you getting married because you really want to be, you're serious about being a good husband or a good wife? And are you farming because your parents expect you to do that? Or are you farming because that's really what you want to do, is you want to have a family farm? And if that's the case, then you got to take those two things not for granted, but be driven every day to be the best at that.
Right.
And that's how you create success. And it's only by taking the principles of what made Michael Jordan successful at basketball, and applying it to farming and the family life, that you're going to be successful at both, right? Mm-hmm. But trying to have like 20 things that you're involved in, I mean, it just never works. I mean, you got to really have very laser-like focus on what is it you really want to accomplish in your life.
Right, right. And so you just mentioned like trying to decide whether you want to farm or your family wants you to farm, your parents want you to farm, whoever it might be.
Yeah.
How do you get to the decision where you finally do decide that it's me who wants to farm?
Well, I think that you really have to decide that for yourself in a very you have to decide for yourself what you want to be when you grow up.
Mhm.
And what I always suggest is that there's a 5,000 hour rule that when you come home to the farm, you put 5,000 hours in. And usually that's about a 2-year window, through less than 2-year window, that you come home to farm and you really see it as a career. Is this really what I enjoy doing? And throughout that whole period of time, you say to yourself, is this really what I want to do? Or am I doing it because my parents want me to do it? And then you also reflect on what are my other options, right? And I mean, 5,000 hours, you should have a good understanding. Is this for a career for me or not? And then if it's not, at 5,001 hours, go do something else. Don't spend 40 years trapped in living somebody else's dream. And so
Right.
for every young farmer that comes home, I would say, put yourself at the 5,000 hour rule, that, you know, if you're not feeling strongly that you would give one time I said this, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but whatever. I got up to the front of it was basically all young lads in the audience. And I basically said, unless you're willing to take this knife and cut your finger, then, and in order to have the opportunity to farm, you're not willing to make the sacrifices that are going to be necessary for you to be able to pass over this farm to your grandchildren.
Right.
You've got to be willing to make the ultimate, any sacrifice to be able to accomplish. I mean, you got to ask yourself, what kind of I mean, think about how many farmers lose their fingers in an accident on the farm. You know, if you're not willing to cut off I'm not saying anybody should cut off their finger, by the way, just make sure we clarify that.
Oh, yeah.
But you've got to be willing to do that in order to be able to have the opportunity to farm. If you're not willing to do that, go find something else that's your bliss, right?
Right.
I had a father, and he basically drove his kids to hockey. The dad had a dream of his sons being hockey players in Canada. I mean, obviously in Canada, everybody has to be a hockey player. Well, dad had a real drive, because basically he played backyard pond hockey as a kid. He never got off the farm. Like, he basically had to milk cows. And so his dream was for his boys to be able to go to be part of the NHL. And so he drove them into all these hockey games. The boys just didn't have the drive, right? They had the talent, but they made a C-level team hockey, which is about 3 down from professional league hockey. And so dad drove them through winter storm, and it was playoffs, and he was up. Basically, the two boys were similar age, so they were both on the same team. And he was upset that none of his boys got more than 5 minutes of hot ice time throughout the whole on that game. And the coach said, well, your boys haven't been doing any exercises. They have the talent, but they just haven't put in the drive to be able to earn the ice time. They have to earn the ice time if they want it. And I've told them that all season, they haven't. So I've benched them. And the dad instead tried to get the coach fired. And you've seen those guys, Caleb, in your.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's youth, it's parents trying to coach from the sideline when the coach is on the other side of the court or the field.
Yeah. And I think the thing is with relentless, I mean, a couple of the key things he said was, you got to be more demanding of yourself than anyone else could ever demand of you. And you know, that's true whether it's sports or farming. You always got to be driven to be the best and get even better. And the other thing he said is, you don't have to love the work, but you got to be addicted to the results. And you never recognize failure. You're always looking for more than one way to get what you want. And, you know, I think that that's what these kids were lacking, was that drive. And then they couldn't even get a scholar. He spent thousands of dollars on them going to hockey camps and, you know, those type of camps. Didn't even get a university scholarship. So went to the local ag college when that dream of them being an NHL players is gone. And they came home to the farm. Crop prices were really good, and commodity prices. This is back in 2012 when commodity prices were really high, and the kids basically just put in 40-hour weeks. And they, the one kid, he didn't even, all he did was milk. He did one job on the farm. He milked cows, and he couldn't even. I was walking around the farm with him. They giving me a tour, and there was a calf that had jumped into the manure pit, and it was an old abandoned manure pit that was filled up with water.
Yep.
And it died. And it died. And I said, well, what's happened here? It was pretty obvious that he says, yeah, I told Dad that the fence around the pit had to be fixed, and he never got around to it. And I'm like, why didn't you do it? And he says, well, that's not my job. Right. And not my job is what I don't want to hear from a guy that's supposed to take over a $40 million farm.
Right.
And that's because he just didn't have a passion. And he went on about how he had worked 47 hours the week before, and how he had only gotten second place in a costume contest for a Halloween contest. And he didn't have enough money at time to spend on building this, whatever he was trying to do with a robot, or I don't know what it was, but he only got second place at this costume contest. And he was really upset about that. And it was pretty obvious that he didn't have that passion. He lived in a like $500,000 house on he was set up with, really nice truck, sports car. He was getting paid $5,000 a month. He was 23, I think. And, was getting all the money, but he wasn't putting it back into the farm because his passion, he was just there for the paycheck. Right. And it was just simply, he didn't have that passion. And it was, for him, it was the one brother, he actually bucked up and he got that passion. The other brother, I mean, we got him. He's a fashion designer in Toronto, living an alternative lifestyle now. Right. But to each his own, right? I mean, whether your kid wants to be a farmer or you want to be a costume designer, don't feel the burden of carrying on family tradition. Do what you really want to do with your life and do it well.
Yep.
But don't make excuses for feeling trapped in somebody else's life. And that's where we get, I mean, whether you want to be a professional hockey player or Michael Jordan, or you want to be the Michael Jordan of being a shop mechanic, find your passion and go for it. But I mean, the worst thing somebody in their early 20s can do is live somebody else's dream.
Yeah. Would you say that it's never too late to figure out what you wanted to be when you grow up?
I think I deal with a lot of men and women in their 40s and 50s that their parents are very reluctant to transfer the assets to the next generation because there's that lack of passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they really just aren't tapped into the raw emotion of what really matters to them. And too often they're distracted by things that really don't matter.
Right.
And
what about for those who want to get into farming? Like they're in their 40s and 50s and they've never gotten into farming. That might not be something that you necessarily deal with a lot because you're usually in the downfall, we can say.
Yeah, I would say that if you want to farm, there are some farmers that I know that have become farmers even though they're not born into it. And the only differentiating factor is because they have that drive.
Right. They figured out
That's the one differentiating factor. It's very tough to do. But that's for somebody that's a farm owner that doesn't have a successor. That's the one thing they want to see is not talent. They want to see that drive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're tapped into that and you have an absolute clear goals, I mean, it's really coming down to really understanding who you are and what you want to be and knowing thyself. I mean, know thyself is something that we don't talk about. I mean, that goes back to the ancient proverbs. I mean, Socrates was talking about, the Delphic maxims. But the thing is, I read a lot of Greek stuff these days. I don't know why. But the thing is that really understanding yourself is critical, whether you're going to be a successful farmer or a successful hair designer. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And for somebody in the early 20s to be very focused on understanding themselves and what they want to do is very critical. And then once you figure out what you want to do, you'll figure out ways to overcome obstacles. But if you don't have absolute clear goals and you're not willing to cut off a finger or another appendage, right, in order to be able to accomplish those goals, you'll never accomplish them. You got to have very laser-like focus, right? And I would suggest like getting a mantra for yourself. Like I have a farmer, he was in his 40s, same situation. He was just going through the motions. And then we got him to really question, like, he didn't have a successful marriage. He didn't have a successful, I mean, basically he was just putting in time. And they had a 10,000 acre operation. And basically we got him to really understand what is it you really want to do with your life. And, you know, he really, he went through that soul search, and as a result, he carries a jackknife now, and it says on the handle, be the best farmer and husband in Alabama. And he is now gone from like being the last one to work to being the first one to work.
Right.
He's gone from, you know, being a position on the farm where basically he was just a glorified employee to now he's managing the employees.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And his parents and his uncle see potential in him. And now they're really open to doing succession planning, but it's only when he was tapped into himself and knew at 5 o'clock in the morning when he got up who he is and what he's wanting to do. Talking about succession planning is foolish until you really understand for yourself who you are. And I think knowing thyself is so underrated and so important in farming.
Yeah. So let's say there's a situation where a young person finally does figure themselves out. They do decide that they want the farm. Their head is in it, sort of thing. Their body's in it. They're ready to go. Maybe they got a spouse on board. Maybe they don't. Is it necessary to look at the financial success of the farm before you take that deep dive? Whether that's, I mean, every farm is different. Some are in trust funds. Some are, every generation has to buy the farm. Do you have to look both short-term and long-term of what that fiscal impact possibly could be? Do you need to be worried about bankruptcy?
Yeah,
Or do you need to have the passion in farming that bankruptcy doesn't matter?
I think the thing is, if you know yourself and you're very driven to make your farm successful in the long term, you will overcome any obstacle that gets in your way. If you feel entitled, I mean, but that's only if you realize that you're not entitled to be successful, that you are the underdog, and that you're going to have to overcome some pretty severe obstacles in order to accomplish that. It may be that you have to go get a part-time job for a couple of years. I mean, you may be in a position that the farm's just not sustainable. There's a farm there that's got some assets, but you might have to get an off-farm job for 10 years in order to make it grow. I have seen guys that have made that successful because they were very driven. They had a long-term vision, and more importantly, they got the family bought into the same vision. And that's the other thing you have to really do is not only be concerned about you knowing yourself, what you want, but getting all your partners to really understand what they want.
Right.
And getting everybody aligned in the same goals. And it's only when you get that sorted out that these other obstacles, whether it's succession planning or farm debt turnarounds, is going to get sorted out. You got to really have a laser-like focus on what is it we really are about as a family, and what are we really about accomplishing with our lives. You know, and I think that you know, the first piece of land that every farmer should buy is their gravesite. And I'm not saying that in a morbid way, but as you know, probably like where I'm from, it's called Burgess Green. It's a little place just a few miles from my farm. And I think that everybody has a little community gravesite that's nearby their farm that they're probably their grandparents have buried and their great grandparents have buried. I would suggest you go buy that plot, not just for yourself, but for whatever you want for a family in the long term. And that should be the first piece of land you buy. And not saying that in a morbid way that you're looking forward to death, but saying to yourself, okay, 100 years from now, what do I want to accomplish between now and the time that I'm in this land,
Right.
on this plot?
And
What am I
those
going
are-
to do with the land around the county? Am I going to be the steward of the land? Is that what I'm signing up to be? And am I going to create a family that's going to, you know, hopefully someday want to be buried here with me as opposed to some other state, right? I mean, what do I really want to accomplish with my life? And if you can make there's a farmer that's very clear cut in his goals that I know, that every time that he has a tough decision to make, what's made the difference between whether or not he stuck with a farm and with the legacy of what he had to overcome some impossible challenges, was he went to the gravesite because he knew that he wanted to be buried there and continue like his ancestors. He went back several generations to that. And I think that is when in farming, you're going to come into moments where you encounter overcoming impossible obstacles. That's what farming is. It's being able to overcome that. And only by knowing your goals and who you are and what you're about, will you be able to be creative and being willing to make the sacrifices necessary to be able to accomplish that.
Right.
And you know, quite often we get distracted when we lose focus on what really matters in life.
I suppose getting distracted would include certain political climates then as well. I mean, in Washington, we have a pretty unique situation, and
yeah, you guys are going through a lot right now in Washington. I mean, I really, wow, that's all I gotta say about that.
Right. Yes.
But the thing is that if you know yourself, that if you know yourself that you want to farm, you'll make it work. You will overcome the impossible. But if you don't know yourself, you don't really know what you want to accomplish, you will take the excuse that's given to you to get out. And that's really what it comes down to, is quite often when I started doing farm debt turnarounds, it was an issue that somebody just wanted permission to pull the plug. They really weren't serious about turning the situation around. They just wanted somebody to fly from out of state and say, okay, it's okay for you to get out.
Right.
That's because they didn't really want to farm. And, you know, it's really important that if you're going to take over assets that took generations to the opportunity to farm, you've got to be dead serious about doing everything it takes to make it work. Because the last thing you want to do, and I've seen this done several times, is, you know, quite often with the way things are set up for farm, your parents might live on a piece in the house that's actually owned by a corporation. And if you go broke farming, you don't want to have to move your parents' couch out of that house and go into subsidized housing. But that's a consequence of you not having that internal drive and not knowing who you are, what you want to do, going through the motions, and as a result, failing.
Mm-hmm.
Only if you know what you want and you're driven to accomplish that, should you take that opportunity. If you aren't, I mean, after 5,000 hours, you'll know. And I really think that in succession planning, it should happen after 5,000 hours, right? You and your family should have a conversation about what is the opportunity for me. If you really are, after 5,000 hours working on the farm, you've proven yourself that you're serious about being a partner. You know yourself, you know that this is really what you want in your life. You should have that conversation. That's what the Coming Home to Farm course is about.
Right.
For your family to have that conversation. It does not need to be, okay, you're going to get 25% of the equity of the farm. You don't have to give any equity at all, right? But what you and your family have to have an understanding about, okay, is what is the opportunity? If I take this farm from 1,000 acres to 3,000 acres, is my siblings that are not farming, are they going to get 1/4? Am I going to get 1/4 of that growth, right?
Right.
Clearly understanding. I mean, that can be demotivating for a lot of people, and that can cause a lot of distractions where people really question, you know, who am I? Because they don't know the ground that they walk on. And I think that's really important is for farm families, when we talk about succession planning, for the son and daughter to know who they are, and the son and daughter to know what the ground is that they walk on. And it's not to feel that it's quicksand.
Right.
And part of that is to have a financial plan and a clear cut strategy as to, okay, how are we going to get out of this, right? Even if the farm is not financially viable today, how is it going to be financially viable 10 years from now? As well as, okay, what are we working toward earning? You know, if we make these sacrifices, is it all for naught? Am I just going to have to split it up between my 6 siblings the day after mom and dad's funeral? You know, that type of certainty is really important for the family. I mean, knowing for yourself what you want in life and also what the opportunity is absolutely important after 5,000 hours.
Right. And I know, I mean, we trade some notes back and forth, but don't really have conversations before these live events because
This is off the pants. Yeah.
Yeah, we want
We're flying by the seat of our pants. Yeah.
want to keep it authentic and stuff. But
absolutely.
I know in our notes, you said to talk about disappointing your parents and why it's very important to do that sooner rather than later. Can you touch on that real quick?
I just think that, I mean, to repeat myself a little bit, you know, I've seen guys break down crying after they have to pull the plug on the farming dream. And basically they've managed the farm for 15 years, or they really haven't managed because they haven't had their heart in it. And as a result, the farm, when it comes across tough, they might blame the economy, but it's because they just didn't have that drive.
Right. Like you said, looking for an excuse. So is it disappointing them before you take over the operation or going through the operation and making sure you're not doing it?
Well, you've got to ask yourself, how would that feel to have to move your parents in their 80s and move their furniture into subsidized housing?
Right.
And that's what's going to happen if you don't have that drive.
Right.
If you're living their dream. I mean, you want to talk about disappointing your parents. Well, that's a great way to do it. And, you know, it's a very sad situation. So the stigma of your family, yes, I mean, for a lot of narcissists, a lot of farmers that are, you know,
Can't tell them how to farm.
Well, I think the thing is, there's a lot of men in their 60s and 70s that have spent their entire lives building up a farm so you can have an opportunity. And if their love is conditional on you taking that opportunity, running with it, there's a lot of young men, especially, but in women too, just don't want to disappoint their parents' dreams. But man, the easiest way to walk into a nightmare is to live somebody else's dream.
Right.
And,
so maybe
that's part of becoming a man or becoming a woman, is when you grow up, and there's a lot of people in their 30s and 40s that have never really truly become an adult because they can't say no to their parents. And it's I mean, if you don't want to farm,
then don't do
that's
it.
fine.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and another thing is you might like farming, but you might want to be a chartered accountant, and you might want to just farm part-time, and that's fine. It might not be your dad's dream, but it's really important that it becomes your dream. And that's why we have the Farming with Family program, is so that you and your parents can have that conversation that mom and dad, I really like farming, but this is, you know, there's something else I like doing as well. And how can we make that work? I mean, you can have a successful hobby farm and there's nothing wrong with that, but have that conversation when you're 25, not when you're 45 and your parents are in subsidized housing suddenly because you didn't have that passion for what you did.
Right.
You have to define for yourself, what is it that you really want in life? It might be that you just want to be a country boy, right? You want to farm a little, you want to have a job doing whatever. I mean, you might want to work for the forestry service. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to tell your parents that, and you've got to, if your parents love you, they will love you unconditionally. But you know, nothing disappoints parents more than you going through the motions, but not really picking up the ball and running with it.
Right.
I mean, you know, it's easy to tell your parents that you didn't really have the passion for hockey, but it's a terrible thing if they try to give you a $40 million farm or $10 million farm and you lose it.
Yeah. Big difference.
Big difference, but really not that much of a difference.
Okay.
Right? When you think about it, I mean, there's a lot of kids in their teenage years, they become adults because they say, Mom and Dad, I just don't like hockey. It's kind of the same thing. Find out what you really want to do.
Right.
And you know, I encourage everybody to walk away from the farm for a couple of years, go get a career doing something else and find out what that is like. And it's really important for you to figure that out so that when you do come home, and if you do take the ball, you really know that that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's absolutely critical. Okay.
Well, thank you. It doesn't look like we've got questions coming in over
Sure.
Zoom. Let
No,
me check Facebook real quick.
Sure. No, it's all good. But know thyself is all I've got to say, and find your bliss. And if you can find your bliss in life, I mean, you'll be successful at whatever you do.
Right. Right. We're getting a little bit of feedback. One comment that come in through my phone says that tonight's topic is my favorite by far. So that is good insight.
Good. Okay.
And, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We're short of an hour, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Everybody needs to get back to life. Everybody needs to get back to that thought process of whether farming's for them or not.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, you take care of yourself.
You as well, Andy.
And by the way, we should just mention, I think go to Farming with Family program at Washington State Farm Bureau, or go to agriculturestrategy.com.
Yeah, coming home to farm course.
We have a 80% discount for anybody from Washington State that's a Farm Bureau member, right? So yeah, we'll look forward to come up out there sometime in the next winter and speak if COVID allows us.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you take care. Bye-bye.
You have a good one.